So you write in this part of the book about evil. Quote, what is it that drives evil? Many things without doubt, but one of them is identified by several of the great philosophers is resentment.
Yes.
That sentiment is one of the greatest drivers for people who want to destroy. Blaming someone else for having something you believe you deserve more. And you're saying this kind of resentment, we don't know as it surfaces whether it's genuine or if it's used to sort of play games of power to evil ends. Can you speak to this? Because it's such a fascinating idea that one of the biggest drivers of evil in the world is resentment. Because if you look at human history, if you look at Hitler, so much of the propaganda, so much of the narrative was about resentment. So is that surface or is it level or is that deep? The resentment that drives people.
It can be any of the above. Let's first of all preface it, everybody has resentment. I use the term ressentiment, which is thought very similar to resentment. Let's stick with resentment, so we don't sound too pretentious. Let me give you a quick example of somebody in our own day who has a form of resentment. Vladimir Putin. Did you see Navalny's documentary, Putin's Palace?
Yes.
Yeah. You remember the stuff about Putin as a young KGB officer in Germany? Remember the stuff about Putin, his first wife's resentment of one of his KGB colleagues who had an apartment that was a few meters bigger than the Putin's apartment?
Yeah.
It's very interesting. And by the way, I'm not saying that, Vladimir Putin became the man he has become and invaded Ukraine because he didn't have an apartment he liked in Berlin or Munich, wherever he was.
But it's this distinct possibility.
My point is that resentment is a factor in all human lives, and we all feel it in our lives, and it's something that has to be struggled against. Resentment is, in political terms, can be it's an incredibly deep thing to draw upon. You mentioned Hitler. Obviously, one of the things that Hitler played on was resentment. Obviously, almost every revolutionary does. The French revolutionaries did as well, and we're not without cause. There's a good reason to feel that Versailles was not listening to Paris in the 1780s, and feel resentment for Marie Antoinette in her palace within the palace, ignoring the bread shortages in Paris. So resentment is a very understandable thing, and sometimes it's justifiable, and it's also deadly to the person as it is to the society. It's an incredibly deep sentiment. Somebody else has got something that you should have, and the problem about it is that it has the potential to be endless. You can do it your whole life, and one of the ways I've sort of found myself explaining this to people is to say, it's also important to recognize that resentment is something that can cross absolutely every boundary. So, for instance, it crosses all racial boundaries, obviously, it goes without saying. More interesting is it crosses all class boundaries and socioeconomic boundaries. And if I was to sort of simplify this thought, I would say, I guess that you and I and everybody watching knows or has known somebody in their lives who has almost nothing in worldly terms, and is a generous person, a kindly person, a giving person, a happy person, even a cheerful person. And I think we probably have also, or many of us will have met people who seem to have everything and who are filled with resentment. Somebody else has held them back from something. Their sister once did something. She shouldn't. She got this, and I should have got that, and on and on and on. It's a human trait, and one of the things that suggests to me is that we therefore have a choice in our lives about this. This is something which we can do something about, not limitlessly, but for instance, there are very good reasons that some people in their lives might feel resentment. Let's say you're involved in a car crash and a friend fell asleep at the wheel and that's why you are spending the rest of your life in a wheelchair. It's a pertinent example of this in American politics at the moment. You would be justified in feeling resentment. And at some point you have to make a decision, which is, am I going to be that person or a different person?
But even in that case, you're saying at the individual level and at societal level is destructive to the mind. Even when you're quote unquote justified,
It rots you. It rots you because the best you can do is to eke out your days unfulfilled.
So the antidote, as you describe, is gratitude.
Yes.
Gratitude is the antidote to evil, in a sense. So gratitude at the individual level and the societal level.
Gratitude is certainly the answer to resentment. I quote in The War in the West this when I read it the first time a few years ago, I was absolutely floored by the brothers Karamazov. Not everything in it, by the way, I won't get into it, but I have some very big structural criticisms of the novel.
Now you're just sweet talking to me because I'm a Dostoevsky fan, but I appreciate this.
Oh, okay. Well, we could get into what I see as being the structural flaws in the Brothers Karamazov. But anyway,
now I'm offended and triggered. And
this is it's like coming out of Macbeth and saying, I didn't think it was much good.
Yeah, there's structural flaws.
Yeah, I thought the ending stank. And the middle wasn't very good. No, when I read that novel, I was floored by a couple of things. One is of course the moment where we realize the devil appears. The moment that Ivan says to his brother, you know he visits me, and you realize that he's talking about the devil, the whole novel goes into this totally different space. And you realize it's even more than you've already realized the novel's about. And then when the conversation occurs between Ivan and the devil, remember, I think he says, describes him as dressed in the French style of the early part of the 19th century. Very strange that the devil will be dressed like that, but sort of. And if you remember that he's sort of cross-legged and rather urbane figure. But the devil mentions in passing to Ivan that he says, I don't know why gratitude is not an instinct that's been given to me. And
you're not allowed. This is not. Given the role of being the devil, this is not one of the things.
It's just not one of the things. And you think, and of course, only a genius of Dostoevsky's stature could, I mean, a lesser genius would have made a whole novel out of that insight. Only Dostoevsky can just throw it away because there's such an abundance of riches that he still has to get through, the structural problems aside. But the
passive aggressive, the microaggression in this conversation is palpable.
A little knife fight. But the reason I mention it is because, of course, when I saw it, I thought this is such a brilliant insight by Dostoevsky. Because why would gratitude not be a sentiment that the devil was capable of? And the answer is, of course, that if the devil was capable of gratitude, he wouldn't be the devil. He'd be somebody else. He has to be incapable of gratitude.
Do you think for Dostoevsky that was as strong of an insight as it is for you? Because I think that's a really powerful idea, that with gratitude, you don't get the resentment that rots you from the core.
Yes, I think it was one of the just endless things that he saw in us. And the way I put it is that, I mean, I also think of it in terms of the era of deconstruction, which is one of the things I'd like us to call the era that's now ending. The era of deconstruction was the era that started, let's say, from the 60s onwards, and was originally an academic game that then spilled out into the wider culture, which was, let's take everything apart. Let's pull it all apart. There are lots of problems with it. One is it's quite boring. You don't get an awful lot from it. You also have the problem of what children find when they try to do this with bicycles, which is they can take it apart quite easily, but they can't put it back together. And the era of taking things apart as a game is one we've lived through, and it's been highly destructive. But you can do it for quite a long time. I'm going to look at this society and I'm going to take it apart by showing systemic problems. I'm going to, at the end of that, what have you got? What have you done? What have you achieved? We need to interrogate this. Okay, interrogate, by all means, ask questions, but interrogate as a deliberate hostility to this. I'm going to interrogate this thing and take it apart. And again, at the end of it, what have you got? Whether you're interrogating a text or a piece of music or an idea or a society, fine. Question, endlessly question. Yes, interrogate assumes it's all a criminal in a cell and it's guilty and therefore it must be taken apart. And that's what we've been doing for decades in the West. And that's resentment. That's one byproduct of resentment. You can't build the thing, but you know how to take it apart.
Is a little bit of resentment good? So you have, that I love Tom Waits, and he has a song where a little drop of I like my town with a little drop of poison. Is it good to do that? Is it good to have a little bit of poison in your drink?
Depends what the poison is, and it depends if you know not to have another drink. Well, it might be the case that you find out, as some alcoholics do, that 1 was too many and 10 is not enough.
So there's a natural, in this case, this kind of deconstruction is a slippery slope. It becomes an addiction, it becomes a drug, and you just can't stop.
Well, you'd have to wean yourself off it and try to start creating again.
Okay.
You'd have to start trying to put things together again. Something I think might be in the throes of starting as it happens.